What is going on, guys? I am Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me, as always, is my co-host, the best co-host in the world, Dave, Mr. PigskinPapers Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. We haven't been on together in a couple of weeks, so I'm happy to be back talking some football, hitting a division. I'm wearing my autographed Javonte Williams jersey that I won on Pristine Auction. They had a raffle on Twitter that somehow I won. It's the first time I've ever won anything like that. And I'm not a Broncos fan, but we're going to talk about the AFC West tonight, so I thought I'd get this jersey out of its bag and throw it on.
Dave, it's not like you to take shots at our guests so early, my friend.
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, Dave, before we get into our discussion tonight, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, sir.
Sure. I'm at PigskinPapers. Both of those P's are capitalized. My website is thepigskinpapers.com. I've got a new article up today, which is players that I'm targeting at ADP. I had an article earlier this week on stacks, whether stacking is a good strategy. So there's a lot of pre-draft content on there for primarily for people in redraft fantasy leagues. That's kind of mostly what I focus on. Paul, where can people find you on Twitter, and where can they find your content?
Yes, guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. And most, if not all, of my content is there on Twitter, or better known as X. And you can find my content as well on YouTube. Well, like Dave mentioned, guys, it's been a couple of weeks since we recorded an episode. Tonight, we're going to be recording another episode of our series, Divisions of Fantasy. Just for those who don't know, the series is about breaking down and analyzing each division in the NFL from a fantasy perspective. With us tonight to discuss the AFC West is Broncos fan and contributor for King Fantasy Sports and data storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aryan to the show. Rod, how are you?
I'm great, man. Thank you for the intro. That was wonderful. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man, we appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Rod, where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Numbers Not Feels, all one word. Profile picture of Nikola Jokic riding a horse because I love that man. But yeah, that's.
Shout out to the Nuggets, man. Nikola's he's a beast.
Oh yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get after it. Rod, I'm curious. How long have you been playing fantasy?
So it's perfect time to ask me this question. I was just discussing with some friends. I think this year will be my 10th anniversary. I'm only 23. So since I was 13 is basically the length of my time seriously watching football. But it started with a redraft league with some family friends, that I was the league manager of. And from then it's evolved to a lot of different leagues, some dynasty, best ball, all sorts of different type of stuff. But yeah, I'm turning on my 10-year anniversary, and I've loved every year of it. There's been some ups and downs, but it keeps me coming back. So
Rod, you and I have a lot in common because I'm also 23. Actually, I've been playing fantasy football for close to 30 years. So since before you were born. But it's great to have a young and fresh perspective. So. I have a two-part question for you. The first part of it is what inspired you to create fantasy content, and I'm curious about your Twitter handle, Numbers Not Feels, which suggests to me a lot of data analytics over kind of gut reaction. But I'd love to hear just a little explanation of your Twitter handle and how that works into your fantasy content, but also what inspired you to start creating fantasy content.
Sure. I'd love to answer that. So starting with what inspired me to create content was over the last few years, especially once I started undergrad, I realized I was so heavily invested into taking this more seriously than just looking at some pre-draft rankings and then going with the flow on draft day. I was putting a lot of time into research and working on my own time with code and things I had learned to do some model building and things like that. So I was if I'm putting all this work in the first place, I want to create some tangible returns, not necessarily monetarily, but I have like pieces of work out there that I can like point to that is my own. So I decided to pick up writing for Kings Fantasy Sports, especially for this past draft cycle. Did some rookie profiles for them, and I really liked the opportunity, not only to work on my writing, but like look how I approach the game, have a more film oriented aspect and things of that nature. And yeah, so that kind of ties into my Twitter handle, Numbers Not Feels. As you guys have alluded to, I have a bit of a data analytics background. I'm getting my master's in data science right now. And one of my favorite sayings, especially in like fantasy football and basketball, is men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. Right. So obviously a lot of that is the context of the stats and knowing when to sample and what to sample. But I truly feel like, I mean, sports are inherently an emotional thing. People have favorite players, people have favorite teams, they have teams they don't like. So a lot of that can cloud people's judgments. And I think if you can get down to the brass tacks and look at numbers and know what they mean and what to look at, especially, it has your best chance of winning.
It's a great
answer.
Ron,
I'm curious.
Appreciate hearing all that. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. How do you think your analytics background has helped you in fantasy?
It's been great. Like at the beginning, it was a little rough because I thought I knew what I was doing when I first started to code, and I thought I was like making major headways, and then I realized I was falling into some pretty beginner traps type stuff where I was putting in too much significance into things that had no meaning whatsoever. But it's really helped me take a look at it from a, as I said, like outside perspective. I can like look for trends. I like looking for like different nuances that I might have not have tried to have an idea about before. One of the things, David, you mentioned, you wrote an article about it, but I've been toying around with recently is the value of stacks. And like, especially like one thing I wasn't really noticing, but like if you look at low value QBs, tight ends, and that type of thing, and then their stacks are more valuable than like players with higher ADPs. So it helps you find like hidden value in drafts. And I really found that like machine learning and statistics, it brings a different aspect to the game that I liked as a kid. And now I'm finding new ways to enjoy it as an adult.
Excellent. You know, when I wrote that stacks article, I crunched some numbers, but that is not my background. I'm really more on the pros side of being a fantasy analyst and writer. And I did some like very basic data analysis just to sort of look at, you know, if you think about stacks just as what they are, they don't by themselves add points, right? If you have drafted a quarterback, drafting his main wide receiver does not in and of itself add points. If you could have drafted a different wide receiver who scores more points, then, you know, you would have been better off drafting that other wide receiver. What it adds is, and I don't want to get into a whole discussion of stacks, but it is kind of interesting since you mentioned it. What it really adds is correlation and risk. I mean, it's just putting more eggs in one basket. And certainly in like tournament formats, that makes all the sense in the world because you have to differentiate. You have to take kind of bigger swings and bigger risks. What I was trying to just, you know, determine is how much sense does it make in redraft leagues? And it really, you know, my conclusion is it you know, just sort of depends a lot on how confident you are in a stack staying healthy and being part of a really good offense. You know, because, and I give one of the examples I give in the article of a stack that didn't work is if last year you looked at Russ Wilson going to Denver and saying, I'm going to stack him with Jerry Jeudy, breakout candidate, you know, whereas if you stacked some other players we're going to talk about tonight, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, you know, that was a golden stack. You know, the number one QB in points and the number one tight end. So it was interesting. And I don't want to get any further into it, but I'm glad you mentioned that because I wish I had more of a data analytics background because I would have been able to crunch the numbers a little better and look at uncorrelated versus correlated and make better sense of it. So maybe you and I can collaborate in the future on a better analysis than I did of whether stacking helps. You mentioned earlier that looking at film is part of what you do as well. Could you talk about that a little more and kind of explain how that factors into your analysis and how much film you watch?
Yeah, sure. So before I started writing, honestly, film wasn't that big of a part of my routine because I was, as I said, mostly like numbers, and I had some idea from watching college football, but a lot of my work wasn't with like incoming rookies. It was with NFL players. So I may not have like watched like all 22 film, but I'd be watching all the games and all that type of stuff. So I have an idea of strengths and weaknesses in that regard. But this year, so I started doing the rookie profiles, and obviously I'm not as big of a college football fan as I am NFL. So I needed to gather some more evidence on these players, and I decided to make film a bigger part of my routine. And it took a little bit of adjustment to know what to look for and all these type of things, and know where to get the film and all that stuff. But I'm liking it, and I think obviously I don't have like the best film reviews on the web or anything like that, or anything close to that. But I think it's becoming one of my strengths, and I do think it's not a necessity if you're trying to get into the fantasy football space. Definitely not. There's almost always someone better than you that can give you their film breakdown. But if it's something that you like to do and you like generating your own opinion, there's not a really high barrier to entry. So I recommend anyone that's interested to pick up some film of like a rookie they like or something and just start from there. You don't have to analyze an entire draft class, but you can start small and then work your way up.
You know, Rod, I'm curious. A lot of people who are more data focused, rather data analytics focused in the fantasy space have their own models as to how they gauge a player's success or lack thereof. And some use age as a way to determine maybe, when is a good time to sell a player, or, if that player will break out, if and when. Do you have your own model? And if so, does age factor into your player success?
So yeah, I've been toying around with a few different things. I wouldn't say I have like a finalized model that I use for all my drafts or anything, but I was actually talking with one of my buddies at school, like in between projects, we were just trying to do something for fun, and we were looking at predicting player career paths. And this is something that I noticed done in a lot of other sports, but wasn't really done in football that much. Is you take the stats that a player has currently put up and where they are in their career and what are the different aspects of their team. For like a running back, you could look at current offensive line ranking and all this different type of stuff, and you try and match it with a former player or a player currently in the league that's farther ahead along than them, and see who are they most similar to see if you can sort of match a career progression. And that's like one model I've been kind of trying to get my hands more into, and that definitely looks at age, because you're looking at a player in every year of his career. And obviously, as age increases for different positions, that means a lot more different things. As for running backs, you're looking at like the age 30 wall, and you want to make sure your model takes into account. Because while it's not necessarily a rule for every player that they fall off at a certain age, the biggest thing when you're doing models is you want to find trends, right? So those rules and notions exist for a reason. So it's definitely an important part of building a model, in my opinion.
It's very interesting because I think as fitness and nutrition and other things continue to get better, you may see those walls moving. I mean, if you even just look at Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, there haven't been that many quarterbacks who played really well past, say, 37, 38. Certain running backs, Derrick Henry is, I guess, going to be 31 this year. I mean, he's kind of has a different build, but I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years to see if those numbers, the walls move a little bit as fitness continues to improve, and nutrition and training and all this other stuff that players now have access to lengthen their primes and their careers. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Completely agree with you.
I want to keep reading your stuff about that because I want to see if your model changes. All right, so let's get into the players and teams in the AFC West from a fantasy perspective. Very interesting division. Obviously, the reigning Super Bowl champions are in that division, and there's a lot of good fantasy assets throughout the division. We'll start with the Raiders. I want to start with Devontae Adams. So last year, a lot of people got very good value on Adams because, he went from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr in a different system, and a lot of people thought he would drop off. He didn't miss a beat. Now he again is changing quarterbacks for the second time in 2 years. Now it's Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think people are again a little nervous about Davante Adams. He's also a year older. Is there any reason to think that he won't once again be a top 4 or 5 wide receiver this year?
I'll be completely honest, and this is no knock to Davante Adams. I think he still has all the talent in the world, but I don't think the Raiders have it on either side of the ball this year, and especially not on offense. I think there's a lot of good wide receivers this year, like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, CD, Diggs. All of those guys have a claim to be top 5, and all of those guys have a better quarterback situation than what's going on the Raiders right now. I think Davante Adams can and will get open. Do I think Jimmy Garoppolo is the guy to get him the ball? Frankly, I don't. I think, honestly, Jimmy is going to be tempted a lot by like Jacoby Myers and Renfro easy passes. He was a yards after the catch merchant in San Francisco, if I'm being real with you. And I don't think he can make those tight window throws. I think Derek Carr is honestly underrated for what he did last season. Wasn't a great situation. And he knows how to feed a wide receiver. So I think I wouldn't be too surprised if Davante gets the 4th or 5th wide receiver spot, but if I had to put my money on it, I would put him in the 5 to 10 range.
So is he a bit of a fade for you at ADP, or?
I think he's going about where I would expect him. I'm personally not going to touch him. I would probably fade him. If I'm going for a elite wide receiver, I want more of a sure thing for those insane weeks, and I don't think Davante is bringing that to you, especially with all the talent and the lower ADPs for wide receivers right now. I think you can draft better than taking Adams where he's going right now.
Fair. A big piece of that Raiders offense is Josh Jacobs, and we know the storyline that he's yet to he's yet to show up to any sort of Raiders practices or training camp and holding out for a contract. Do you think he'll be on the field for week 1?
I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, but for me, I think there's too much money from his standpoint and not enough leverage for him to skip out this year. I could see him. I always thought Saquon was coming back, and my immediate reaction was that Jacobs wouldn't come back this season just because there's no good locker room in Las Vegas compared to New York. There's no sense of authority or respect with the coach compared to Dable. But on the other hand, the running backs really have no leverage in these contract negotiations, and especially with the franchise tag, you're in no position. You're just hurting your career and hurting your career earnings by sitting out. So as much as he might want to stick it to the Raiders, I think for a career perspective, his agent's going to convince him to play.
Yeah, you asked what we thought. I think that's the case as well. I think he'll show up at the latest possible moment that he can. He may be out of shape. He may be disgruntled. He may be angry, but he'll be playing for a contract. So I think when push comes to shove, I think all these running backs saw what happened to Le'Veon Bell, although he did get paid. His career was kind of never the same after his holdout. So, yeah, I think Jacobs will end up being there week 1. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, just based on what he could get from the franchise tag, and knowing that running backs aren't going to be getting the higher contracts that we've seen. The guys like Kamara and even Ekeler and Zeke like that. Those contracts are no longer available for running backs. So I think he'll be there week 1, but I think there's a 5% chance that he might not be there.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. And, especially if it looks like the Raiders are going to be a dumpster fire, which I don't know that they are going to be, but, that team didn't really improve itself very much this past offseason, and Darren Waller's gone. So we'll see. Let's skip over to the Los Angeles Chargers. I almost said San Diego Chargers. I still call them that more often than not. So I want to talk about Justin Herbert. So 2 years ago in 2021, he was the quarterback 2 on the season. A lot of people forget that. And then last year, he got hurt. He had that crushing hit he took against the Chiefs, played with fractured rib cartilage. Keenan Allen missed a bunch of games. Mike Williams missed a bunch of games. Rashawn Slater, I think, missed the whole season, his starting left tackle. And things just kind of, didn't go right all year. And he ended up as the QB 11. With the changes that the Chargers made this offseason, do you expect Herbert to return to kind of like top 5 status? He also got paid, got his contract. So what do you think about Herbert this season?
So as far as QBs go, I have the tier 1, which is Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts in my mind. And then I have a tier 2, which is where I'm placing Herbert. And he's there with Lamar, Burrow, and Trevor Lawrence is the last name I have on that list. And I think really with Kellen Moore, he has a chance to put up big numbers. I really like what that offense can do. And he got a lot of hate, I'm sure, as no Paul knows, in Dallas with what he was doing. Some questions about whether he can put up numbers when that matters most. But as far as like raw totals go, Kellen Moore was one of the best in the league at creating offense. So I think it's going to be a big year for Herbert. I have no knock on his talent. I think he has the it factor. He can make any throw on the field. Maybe has the wrong decision sometimes, or it seems like the wrong decision, but then he makes an amazing throw. So it ends up working out either way. But that's what all the best QBs do anyways. So I think he has a chance to return to top 5. I'm putting him in the 4 to 6 range. But I'm definitely in on Herbert this season. I like his chance to put up massive numbers.
Yeah, I do too. I think all 3 of us do. Just curious, Justin Fields was not in your second tier. I know we're not talking about the NFC North, but I was a little surprised at that. Do you want to talk about him for just half a second?
Yeah, it's actually hilarious you said that because I actually have him in my second tier on my notes, but like at the last second, I decided not to mention it. I think he could be there. I'm very on or off about whether he's going to be there. Like I think his legs are definitely putting him in that conversation. I really liked what I saw. Like, I mean, DJ Moore's fast. We saw that in preseason, him running 60 yards with the screen. So I really like DJ Moore's value, and I think if I'm saying that, I kind of have to like Justin Fields' value. So I'll put him in that second tier, but you could also convince me to take him out of it. I could go either way, but I like him as a quarterback, and I like DJ Moore, and I like that pairing, just to put it briefly.
I agree with you there. One of the receiving weapons there for Justin Herbert is Keenan Allen, and we were talking about Devontae Adams' age at 30. Well, Keenan Allen's about to turn 31, and we've seen him have some issues with staying healthy. I mean, last year he missed a few games, but prior to that, he stayed relatively healthy. And then earlier in his career, again, he dealt with some injuries. He's currently the wide receiver 17.5 PPR. Where would you draft him in a half PPR redraft?
I think 17 is just about at the top range of where I would take him. I'm really big on Quentin Johnson this year. I think he's going to take more of Mike Williams' targets than anything. Keenan Allen, thankfully, I think he has a skill set that age isn't going to really take away a lot of what he's able to do on the field. He knows how to get open. He's not a burner, and that never really was his game. So I think 17 in PPR is pretty good. I'm big this season into the idea of drafting like 3 of like the middle tier wide receivers and building your team that way. And I would definitely be happy if he was one of those guys on my team. But I can envision him putting up a lot of yards, maybe not the touchdowns in Kellen Moore's offense. I kind of see that going to Austin Ekeler and Gerald Everett as a low-key guy, but I do think he's worth taking at 17 and below.
You just mentioned Ekeler, right? So he's 2 years in a row, he's led the NFL in touchdowns. And that's pretty good for an undrafted free agent. and he got paid this offseason. Should he, just given what he's done the last 2 years, the touchdowns, and also he's been first or second in receptions each for running backs each of the last 2 years, he's been healthier than Christian McCaffrey. Why is he not the RB1? Is there a good case to be made that he should be the first running back to come off the board in drafts?
I think there definitely is a good case. Like, as you said, he doesn't really have those injury issues that Christian McCaffrey has. And the best ability is availability, right? So you want your number 1 overall pick to be playing games for you and not on the bench. I think especially this season, you might get clowned for it, but you could take Austin Ekeler number 1. There's no Elijah Mitchell on the Chargers. There's no coach that loves rotating running backs 1 through 4. So there's a lot of chances for McCaffrey not to get those yards and touchdowns that he got last year. And I think McCaffrey's still going to put up a great season, but I do like the idea of being confident that your first round, number 1 overall pick is going to be playing every game. And he's one of the most durable players in the league, especially in a position that likes to get banged up. So I would be comfortable taking him number 1 overall. I know that's sometimes sounds like a hot take to a lot of people. They like the allure of CMC and all those highlights and everything, but I think dependability is the path to go.
We were talking earlier about Kellen Moore. You sound pretty excited about the potential for that Chargers offense. Mm-hmm. So, you kind of answered this next question on the show sheet, so I'll go a different direction here. Is there anything that concerns you about Kellen Moore, calling the offense for the Chargers this year?
Yeah, Paul, you can speak on this after I'm done, but the creativity when he was on the Cowboys felt like it came in weird spurts. I feel like there'd be a quarter where he's firing on all cylinders, keeping the defense on their toes, and then he just falls back into the same old stuff like quarters 3 and 4. So he doesn't always put a full game together, but compared to Joe Lombardi and other offensive coordinators the Chargers have had in the past, I think he's a lot fresher, a lot younger than what they've been doing. And Herbert, I think he just really needs a chance to unleash his deep ball, man. I mean, he was throwing a lot of short passes last year. He was doing okay with it, but like the times he did throw the deep ball, his stats were tremendous. And I don't think that was like a small sample size thing. I think if you watch him in college, you watch any time in the pros, that's a factor of his game. He's just waiting to bring out more consistently. I'm afraid Kellen Moore might not go to that as much as he should. But if he does, I think that offense is going to click on levels that Herbert hasn't seen before in the NFL.
And then you have their coach who'll go for almost any 4th down he can get. So
exactly,
that adds chances to score points. And it's interesting too. I think their kicker, Dicker the kicker, didn't miss a kick last year. I think he was perfect from the time he became their kicker on extra points and field goals. And that could just be a very high-scoring offense. If you're in a league that requires you to play kickers, I think he's a decent sleeper. Again, their coach goes for a lot of 4th down, so that can be frustrating, when they're in field goal range. All right, let's move to the world champion Kansas City Chiefs. So we know Travis Kelce is solid gold. He's the gold standard, really. You look across any position, he's been a top 1 or 2 tight end 7 straight seasons. Last year, he had 90 more fantasy points in a half PPR than the tight end 2, which is the same difference as the number 2 tight end to the number 22 tight end. That's how far he separated himself from the field. In leagues that require you to start a tight end, how high is too high for Travis Kelce? Can you make a case that he's a top 5 pick?
I think you can definitely make a case that he's top 5. I wouldn't go as far as to say he's number 1, but as just what you said, the 90-point difference. When you're drafting, you're looking for where the value is on the board, right? And usually that comes in positional advantages, especially in tight end. You're only starting 1. Everyone has to start 1. and after 2 or 3, you kind of really don't care who you have most of the time. So I would be fine taking him in that 3, 4, 5 range. He just gives you so much. The Chiefs, I mean, with Justin Ross's injury, I saw Rashee Rice was carted off somewhat earlier today. Don't know how that went, but they even have less receiving targets than last year somehow. So I don't see his numbers falling off. And again, he's a durable guy, no injury history. And it's still Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball. So there's no reason to believe that anything that's been going on the last 5 or so years is going to change. So why not create that positional advantage for yourself where you know you're going to be getting more points than your opponent in that position guaranteed week in, week out. Go ahead.
He is going to be 34, I think, in October. So you mentioned earlier, your age modeling. And he has been remarkably durable. I don't think he's missed a game due to injury. I think he sat one game, which maybe because they had already clinched the 1 seed or something like that. I don't think he's missed a game due to injury in like 5 years. Any concerns about his age and, using that high a draft pick on a position player that's going to be that old?
I think tight end is definitely one of the spots you can get away with drafting. Tight end and wide receiver and quarterback are generally more forgiving than running back as far as age goes. And you, as I said, there's always exceptions to the rule, and that tends to be those truly elite players. And I think Kelsey could be one of those exceptions as time goes on. And when you have such a storied past and such a history of being that dependable at such a high level, I'm willing to trust you until you show me a reason not to. When you start getting into the guessing games, I'm going to predict this guy's going to fall off here. That's a lot easier to do when it's later rounds and they're players that haven't shown it as far in the past. But when you're up to these blue chip players, you really just want to believe in their past, and you don't want to take those gambles, because then you can see yourself trying to get too smart too early in the draft, and that's never a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, we know it's a pretty safe bet to take Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce in drafts, Rod. But when you look at these KC wide receivers, of course, you've got Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. You mentioned Rashee Rice, and then Valdez Scantling there. When you look at those wide receivers, who's your favorite target at ADP?
At ADP, something I was going to bring him up no matter what questions you guys ask, but Rashee Rice is one of my favorites. I think he's basically free in every draft for where he's going, and there's no alpha in that locker room as of now. I think he has that mentality to take over. Kadarius Toney, always off the field. I mean, he's electrifying, but for like how many snaps a game can you really trust that guy to play? Justin Ross hadn't played a game in 2 years, and now after 1, he was already injured. Scantling is good for a good deep ball here and then, but he's not the number 1 receiver on that team. Everyone knows is Travis Kelce. So you're looking for someone who can really control like a wide receiver locker room. And I know he's a rookie, so I might be a year too early on this, but I definitely think he'll be worth more than what you're drafting him at. And at the worst, you can add him on another player, Rashee Rice, in a trade. And then there's a good 20% chance he completely breaks out and he starts remember, Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback. So the sky's the limit for any player that shows they truly have it on that offense. And I think looking at his college tape, the catch radius, the mentality, it's all there. So I'm big on Rashee.
So you mentioned free in drafts, and another Chief who's basically free in drafts is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, kind of the forgotten man, a first-round draft pick just 3 years ago. Is there any value there? What do you think about this backfield, and could Clyde sort of surprise and reclaim his old job, or at least part of it?
I'd like to say, and again, I'm going to hit you guys with another hot take here. Knowing Andy Reid and how he loves using unknown running backs, I think there's a better chance that Prince takes over what Clyde Edwards-Helaire was doing more than Clyde Edwards-Helaire takes back what he was doing. They seem very comfortable running with Jerick McKinnon as their primary receiving back. and he definitely showed that he still has some of the speed left in him last year. So there's no reason to think that Clyde is suddenly going to be competing for all these receiving targets, and Pacheco is a tough runner and definitely what they want to see between the tackles. So what's left is plays that those two guys need to take off, or maybe pass blocking situations. And I really think, I mean, for lack of a better words, Deneric has that dog in him, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire doesn't at this point in his career. I would like the lottery ticket that's even cheaper than free, and Deneric, for instance, than whatever CEH is providing you in that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting if you think about the Chiefs, because you alluded to it. Outside of Mahomes and Kelsey, and maybe Harrison Butker as their kicker, it's a lot of dart throws. And that was a little bit true last year. I guess people thought, maybe Juju was sort of a more reliable 6 targets a game kind of guy. McKinnon, and Pacheco emerged as the season went on. But as you look at the Chiefs now, I think if you look at drafts, you will see Chiefs coming off the board all over the place after about, once Mahomes and Kelsey come off, really nobody until about the 6th or 7th round, when you'll see Pacheco, and then it's just who do you like? And a lot of, there's Tony, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, McKinnon. So it's going to be interesting, and the value, they're going to score a lot of points. There's going to be a lot of touchdowns. Mahomes probably throw over 40 again. 10 to 15 of them to Kelsey, and then, it's a guessing game. I guess it's good to get a bunch of pieces of that offense if you have a big bench, and you can wait to see where the value is.
I completely agree.
So, Rod, don't shoot the messenger here. I didn't write this question, but you're looking at your guy, Russell Wilson, for the Denver Broncos. Is he cooked, and what are you expecting in year 2 in Denver and his first year with Sean Payton?
So I'm not one to overreact easily, but last year was one of the more tragic football seasons I can remember, and the Broncos have just been tragic season after tragic season after that Super Bowl. So I've seen a lot of disappointment. I do think it's going to be better. It's hard not to be, but it's going to be better than last year. Sean Payton has way more control over the locker room and way more control over a playbook and the game clock than Nathaniel Hackett has. I do think the O-line is going to be the biggest block in their way to having a successful offense this season. I'm expecting much more running, much more play action, and much more intermediate throws with like the play action deep ball that Russ likes working with. Nathaniel Hackett's offense, and I was talking about this with you guys before. He was brought on to the Broncos to bring Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't brought to work with Russell Wilson, and that pairing clearly didn't work out. So I'm expecting Russ to bounce back. I wouldn't put all my eggs in the Broncos offense. I don't think anyone's doing that, but in case you have some people out there that were thinking about it, don't do it. But there's still some value to be found. And I don't know how much hype is building into some of these ADPs, but I do think there's still some good value for some of the skill players on that team.
So one of the more talked about skill players on that team is Jerry Jeudy. Last year was his 3rd season, and that was, a lot of people picked him as a breakout last year, especially with Russ Wilson coming over there. 3rd-year wide receiver breakouts is kind of a typical thing. It didn't happen. And again, he battled some injuries. I don't think he's had a fully healthy season yet where he played all 16 or 17 now games. What do you think about him this year? Would you be comfortable taking him as your wide receiver 2? And his current ADP, I think, is around wide receiver 22. So sort of the end of that, wide receiver 2 group. How do you feel about him this season?
So in PPR, I'm a much bigger fan. I was watching our preseason game against the Cardinals last Friday, and Sean Payton kept the first team offense on there longer than usual just to have them get into some sort of rhythm. And Judy had a bad drop and then followed it up with a touchdown. So I think that's perfectly encapsulates his entire career. And I was kind of hoping the drops were an issue of the past, but I guess not. A lot of people, I don't know why they were saying this online, but they were like, oh, Cortland Sutton's going to fill that Michael Thomas role that Sean Payton loves. And I don't know why they thought Cortland Sutton would be the one doing that when the best route runner on the team is Jerry Jeudy, and Joe Lombardi loves his short passes, as we were talking about before. And he can really fill in that Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas role that Sean Payton and Lombardi have been using in the past. And I think there's no deep threat on the Broncos. We'll see how Marvin Mims looks. KJ Hamler's out of the picture. So I really like Jeudy for what he can provide underneath and what he can provide in the intermediate throws that maybe Russ wasn't doing so well at last year. As far as wide receiver 2 goes, at the end, I'll take it. I don't want to go too high and invest too much into him because there's a bit of a skeptic in me that I kind of have to see Russell Wilson put together. I honestly have to see that offensive line put together some good games. Hopefully this preseason they'll figure it out. But I think the ingredients are there for them to cook something up with Jeudy this season.
Yeah, another unit that's on that Denver team that's interesting to me is the running backs. Denver went out and added Samaje Perine, and we know that Javonte's returning from a serious injury he suffered last year, but he sounds like he's going to be getting some work here in this preseason game. You look at that Denver backfield and looking at Javonte himself as the RB27, is he a value, or do you still think he's a bit overpriced?
I think RB27 is about right. I think that's actually good value for him. I don't think he's going to be a workhorse. Perine is one of the best second backs you can have in the league. Very early signing for us, so it's definitely something that we knew we wanted. And one of the best traits of running back to have is pass blocking. And when you can pass block, you're not going to be taken off the field. So especially for those 2-minute drills and hurry up offenses that Payton likes to run at the end of the half and that type of thing, it's going to be Perine out there, I think. And obviously you're going to have Javonte working back from a horrific injury. He's already weeks ahead of schedule. So how early you want to put him into a lot of carries, I'm not sure what the plan is there. I wouldn't guess that it's going to be too much too soon. If you do draft Javonte, it's a situation I think you have to take Samaje as well. You're kind of just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't. There's a slim chance they're both playable, but there's also a very large chance Javonte re-injures something, and then it's going to be Perine's backfield. So I like the value for Javonte at RB27. I think you're not going to find a lot of other running backs with that skill and that opportunity in that range. But as I said, if you're doing that, you want a piece of both parts of the backfield at that point.
Yeah, I keep expecting to see them kind of in on one of these free agent running backs. I kind of thought they would be with the situation with Javonte. I mean, I guess the fact that they haven't signed one maybe speaks well about his recovery. But there's still a couple of them out there. So I wouldn't be shocked if Denver adds a running back, signs an additional running back before the season starts. But we'll see. One pleasant surprise last year on their offense, and there weren't many, was rookie tight end Greg Dulcich. As the season went on, seemed like he developed a pretty good rapport with Russell Wilson. Russ was looking for him in the red zone, and there were a couple of big seam plays that they broke in different games. Do you think he's a decent breakout candidate for year 2, and do you like him where he's being drafted?
We talked about this earlier about how after the top 3 tight ends, it's really whatever you want. And if you want high upside, I think Dulcich is definitely a good path to go. The first depth chart came out and everyone was like, oh, why is Adam Troutman number 1 and Dulcich number 2? And beat reporter came out. It was saying that he looked great in camp, but it was like a pass blocking thing, and it was probably a motivation thing to put him second. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I don't see him doing any Taysom Hill action. Some people were like, oh, he threw a ball 3 times in high school or something like that. No, I don't think that's going to be happening, even though it's Sean Payton. But I mean, he was one of the brighter spots on the offense last year, and Sean Payton loves his tight ends, and sometimes he likes to use a bunch. So that would be an issue I could see where he's not on the field all the time. But like the Broncos they have Samaje Perine outside of Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, but there's no good wide receiver 3 there. Someone has to catch passes, and maybe they're not scoring touchdowns because we saw what they did last year, but I think he could be a good tight end and not win you a lot of weeks, but not lose you a lot of weeks either.
Yeah, very fair. We look at this division. Of course, Kansas City is always going to put up points. The addition of Kellen Moore to the Chargers offense, we're expecting them to put up points. And, the only really question marks are the Raiders and the Broncos, but we've even seen them put up points. Looking at this division, which one player do you want on all of your fantasy teams?
I can give you 2. So I mentioned them earlier, but I think even if you don't take Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine is going to have great value for where he's being drafted. And if even with injury or just as trade bait later on, that's one player that you should be targeting, especially in PPR formats. And then my second one, I talked about him earlier, but Rashee Rice, I think you gotta take him. And since I already talked about him, I'll give him one player I haven't mentioned, Jacoby Myers. I think he's a guy that is the perfect wide receiver for Jimmy Garoppolo. He's not a burner, but he can get open, and he loves those middle of the field routes. Hunter Renfrow could be infringing upon what he likes to do in an offense, but I think Jacoby is the better player, to be honest with you, and could be a good wide receiver 4-ish if you want to pick him up for your team.
So, Paul, for
Dave, how about
me,
you?
Yeah. So for me, I mentioned earlier, I published an article today, players I'm targeting at ADP basically. And the cover photo of the article is Justin Herbert. And the first player I mentioned in the article is Justin Herbert. So he would be my answer if there weren't, in one quarterback leagues, there's no one QB that I have to get in every draft because, it goes like 10 deep with really good quarterbacks or even 12 deep. But I would love to get Herbert where I can because I do think that the bounce back is likely. And, he's right now he's the QB7 by ADP or ECR. And I like him to finish. He's my QB5. And I think he'll finish around the QB5, 4 or 5, if not higher. So he'd be one, but I don't have to get him in every draft. Rod stole my thunder a little bit, and I took this player in the Scott Fishbowl, but I do like Perine a lot this year. I think I got him in maybe the 10th or 11th round in the Fishbowl, maybe the 9th round. Sean Payton has a long history of rotating his running backs and not just giving it all to one guy. I mean, you saw it with Kamara and Ingram for a bunch of years, and they're not going to rush Javonte back. And with every day that they don't bring in another running back, and I don't think Perine is an elite talent, but he showed last year when he got opportunities that he can kind of do a little bit of everything. He can catch passes, he can run between the tackles, he can pass block. The coaching staff in Cincinnati clearly trusted him. So I think at minimum he'll be flex worthy, maybe even RB2 worthy, not every week. So he's a guy I'd like to get on as many teams as I can. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go with Isaiah Pacheco. He's currently going as the RB27, and we look at this Chiefs team. Anytime you've got a chance to draft a player from an Andy Reid-led offense with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and a lot of question marks everywhere else. I like what he showed last year. He had 7 weeks as finishing inside the top 24 of running backs. I like his opportunity, and I think he's pretty. You can write it in pen that he's the starter there for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I like that one. All right, we'll talk about everyone's favorite thing, which is projecting busts. Rod, we'll start with you, and then Paul, you can give yours, and then I'll give mine. Rod,
Sure.
which player in this division do you think is most likely to be a bust in 2023? You know, compared to where they're being drafted, I would say.
It feels kind of like a cheat to pick a boomer bust player as a bust, but Mike Williams, to me, I think he's very boomer bust, and it's going to be a lot more bust than boom this year. I think Quentin Johnston is, at this point in their careers, better physically. Has none of that injury history and is fresh out of college and is in one of those positions where you don't need that much of an acclimating period to the league, especially in this day and age. So I wouldn't trust having Mike Williams in my starting lineup at any week in this season. Just always knowing it could be an under 5-point week really doesn't do it for me. So I'm going to be fading Mike Williams pretty heavily.
Paul, how about you?
Yeah, my bust guy, you know, again, Rod, no disrespect, but I'm going with Russell Wilson. I know he's currently the quarterback 15. I don't think he's going to finish outside the top 24 or anything, but you talked about the offensive line. He's learning another new offense. I'm not really sure what to make of Russ. You know, there's thoughts that he might actually be done. There was discussions that he might be done, you know, before he even got traded to Denver. So, you know, I'm a little hesitant to trust Russ this year.
So I'm going to go with a player who I do think could end up having a pretty good year, but I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs. I just think there are too many red flags right now between his contract situation. The rate, I just don't sort of like the whole vibe coming out of the Raiders. I don't know that they're going to have as many scoring chances as they had last year. I love the talent. You know, I also think drafting him as high as he's going is chasing performance a little bit. You know, last year was by far his best year in his first 4 seasons. He also led the NFL in touches last year. So, you know, there's a decent amount of wear and tear. This one could come back to bite me. I just don't want him at his ADP. You know, when I'm taking guys in the first 2 rounds or in an auction draft with a decent amount of my budget, I don't want to take guys who I'm kind of looking at them and they're red flagging me a little bit. So I'm not predicting him to be a bust this year. I just think that he's unlikely to return his value, and I think people are going to overdraft him. And I'm not going to have many shares of him because I'm not willing to take him at his current price.
Very fair.
Sure. All right, we've talked about one player we all want. We've talked about a bust. How about a sleeper? Rod, give us a sleeper in this division that you like.
I just brought him up, but Quentin Johnston, I think, is my sleeper, or another rookie wide receiver for you, Marvin Mims. I think both of those guys are going into positions where they're wide receiver 3s with a pretty solid hold on that wide receiver 3 spot and could potentially pull for more. Both of them have an important place in their offenses, I think. I think as I mentioned, the big play needs to come back in the Chargers playbook, and Quentin Johnston's that guy. And Denver hasn't had a speed threat in a while. I mean, KJ Hamler was supposed to be that guy, and he couldn't stay on the field. And Cortland Sutton can catch a deep ball, but he doesn't have those burners. So Mims has had some injury issues. So he hasn't really played in preseason, and not a lot of people are going to be thinking about him, but he's a good sleeper that you can put some money on.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, so you got to start asking me these questions first before Rod. Because the first name I had on my list was Marvin Mims, and the reason, I mean, I have Rod put it better than I can, but you know, the injury to Tim Patrick plus the KJ Hamler situation has just kind of opened the door for a rookie to come in and get a lot of snaps and a lot of opportunity that he probably wasn't going to necessarily get. So, and he does have big playability, and Russ has shown deep ball ability in his career. I don't think Pirine counts as a sleeper, so I won't mention him again. One other name I will mention though is someone that that Rod mentioned earlier, which is MVS in Kansas City. Of all the wide receivers there, I feel the most confident in him getting a decent snap share and target share, even though he's mostly a deep threat guy. I think he's sort of the veteran of all the wide receivers they have there. He had a little bit of a decent rapport with Mahomes last year, and I could see Tony barely playing this year. I could see Sky Moore, kind of not taking that next step. And then you've got, kind of rookies or guys who haven't played in a couple of years. And I could see MVS emerging as the one wide receiver there that's a little bit more reliable. I know that hasn't been his MO necessarily, but we're talking about sleepers. I don't mind a late dart throw on him. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, my guy, he's not so much a sleeper, but he's definitely being overlooked, kind of being kicked to the curb, and rightfully so, because he can't stay on the field. But I'm taking chances on Kadarius Toney myself.
All the Giant fans, when they hear that name, they just make a face. The Giants.
I can understand it, man.
Yeah, that was that whole thing. Like they got sniped on Devonta Smith. They kind of panicked, traded back with the Bears. The Bears come up and take Justin Fields. It gets to the Giants, and they're like, "Oh, what do we do now?" Kadarius Toney. We'll take a gadget player who barely had good college numbers, but is uncoverable and makes people's ankles break. So, and then
it's weird, man. I have never seen, at least not out of a lot of players, just beefing with their fans of their former team on Twitter like that. He loves the attention, good or bad. And I mean, I don't always like to put character things into my fantasy opinions, but sometimes when you're that hot or cold, it can lead to a lot of different issues. But he just loves to talk, I guess.
So he's even taken it as far as he's gone as far as like if a fantasy analyst has said something bad about him on Twitter or X, he'll DM them and like start criticizing them, talking about they've never played football, they don't know football, they need to shut the F up and stuff. It's very strange.
Well, he scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl, and I think that pissed off Giant fans to no end. And apparently he should have scored a second one, but Sky Moore lined up on the wrong side or something, and the touchdown that went to Sky Moore was supposed to be a play to Kadarius Toney. And it's amazing that the Eagles didn't cover either of those plays because it was the same exact play, and it had already worked once. But that's another story for another day. So we're kind of getting to the end here. We like to wrap up our show with a bold take. Okay. We're each going to give one bold take relating to this division. Rod, I'll let you go because I know you're going to take mine. So you go first.
I want this to be true, and it's going to be bold. I doubt this is yours, Dave, but I think Judy's going to put up 1,000 yards with 6 touchdowns this season. I think someone's going to catch the passes. It's not going to be as big of a dumpster fire as last year. I think he could still do better than that in his career, and I don't think that's the top of his potential. But I do think he can, like, as far as bold goes, that's as bold as I'll say about the Broncos without having to look back at the end of the season and cringe at what I said. So
don't worry, there's no recording. There's no recording of this. We could purge all copies if Judy ends up having 300 yards and 1 touchdown.
Oh God! I hope not.
How about you? What's your bold take from the AFC West?
My bold take is Justin Herbert will be fantasy QB1 in 2023.
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah, he's got to get past that big 3. One of whom is in the division, but I like it. And he was the QB2 2 years ago, so it's not.
It's on the table. It's on the table for sure.
Okay, so my bold take is not a fantasy take, but it's that Josh McDaniels is gone by Thanksgiving. Which I don't know. It's only year 2 for him, but I just have a bad vibe. Bad vibes about that team. I can't really explain it. I don't think Jimmy G is the right fit. And I could just see them. It's a tough division. Denver should be better. I could just see them getting out to like a really bad start and ownership just saying, you know, we're going to go in a different direction. So I don't think it happen, but so that's what makes it bold. What were you going to say, Rod?
I was a bit much younger, so it could be a little skewed when he was the coach of the Broncos, but I've talked to a lot of fans that are older than me, and I'm on a lot of Broncos forums, and he just did not command respect. He was cheating on the Broncos. He was like filming other teams' practices and all this type of stuff. So I like my coach to be, I mean, this is going to sound super hypocritical when I say a little morally sound when I have Sean Payton as my coach right now.
Right,
but yeah, but when you have a Super Bowl, you can overlook a lot of things. So
that's true.
I agree with you completely. I don't think he's head coach material of any team. And I think the only reason he wouldn't be fired mid-season is the Raiders just don't have the money to pay anyone else. So we'll see. We'll see if that ends up mattering, but I like where your head's at, Dave.
Excellent.
So, Rodman, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. Before we get you out of here, we talked a little bit about your content and where we can find it. Remind the people again where, the content that you're creating and where they can find it.
Yeah, I'm a writer for Kings Fantasy Sports, so definitely check those guys out if you haven't heard of them. You can find me on Twitter/X at numbersnotfeels. Just finished up a busy summer, so I'm going to be getting into more content, especially more analytic content as fall progresses, and do some in-season stuff. So you can find me on there. And Paul, Dave, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I've loved being on here, and you guys have a great podcast.
Well, thanks very much.
Dave, where can people find you on Twitter?
So I'm at PigskinPapers. And my website is thepigskimpapers.com. I've still got preseason content dropping regularly, and then during the season there will be regular weekly content, same as I had last season. Paul, where can people find you?
Guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.